Okay, so I'm Omar Khatari. I'm Professor of Human Geography in the School of Geography at the University of Melbourne, and also based at the University of Manchester in the UK. And I want to begin by acknowledging the lands and elders, past and present, in the places where we live and work, and in the places where these films that you're going to see were made. And thank you very much for zooming in. I hope that you're all keeping well and safe in these very strange and uncertain times. It's good to see that so many people have registered for this event, and maybe one of the benefits of online events such as these. So this evening we're going to watch together, well, simultaneously but at a distance, three beautiful and fascinating films that have been made by researchers in the School of Geography at the University of Melbourne. That's Jane Dyson, Vicky Zhang and Lisa Palmer. And this special screening event draws together these three films that bring out the intimate and the sensory aspects of cultural continuity and change across rural Asia. They feature communities in India, in China, and the border of Indonesia and Timor-Leste. And each film, in its own sort of unique way, explores how modernity is shifting people's relationships in some way to their communities and the places that they call home. And the three films are Spirit, Longing and Belonging in the Indian Himalayas, the filmmakers Jane Dyson, Drum Village Primary School, based in China, the filmmakers Vicky Zhang, and Wild Honey, Caring for Bees in a Divided Land by Lisa Palmer. So before we watch the films, I'm going to introduce the directors, the filmmakers, ask them to briefly introduce their films, and then we invite you to watch the films that will be shown back to back with a minute break in between each one. And together they last for just over an hour. And the screening then will be followed by a live Q&A session with the three filmmakers. So to watch the films, you simply need to follow the YouTube link that's going to be posted in the chat, and it's also on the on-screen image that we'll put up in a moment. So you could then just copy and paste the link into your browser. But if you have any technical questions, can you please use the Q&A function, which is down at the bottom of the Zoom bar menu on the right. And we'll have time also for Q&A after the films. So we'd like you to have this sort of quite an immersive experience. So you might not want to pose questions as you're watching the films, but please do post questions or comments on the Q&A function in the minute break between the films or at the end. First of all, it's my absolute delight and pleasure to introduce three wonderful colleagues of mine from the School of Geography. Jane Dyson, whose film we're going to see first, is Senior Lecturer in the School of Geography at Melbourne, and she conducts long-term ethnographic research in the Indian Himalayas, where she examines issues around gender, work, youth politics, and social transformation, and all of that really from a perspective of social geography and cultural anthropology, but also development studies. And her research has been presented in her book, Working Childhoods, which was published in 2014, and the award-winning film Spirit, which we're going to watch, and also Lifelines. The second film that we're going to see is by Vicky Zhang, who's a graduate student researcher in the School of Geography at Melbourne. And her research really focuses on changing working class life using qualitative methods and theories of embodiment. And she particularly focuses on contemporary China. And her PhD research is absolutely fascinating, tracks life after loss for workers affected by coal mine closures in regional Australia and in China. And her honours research, which is out of which the Drum Village Primary School film emerged, explored the lives of migrant worker men in a village in Jiangxi province in northern China. And Lisa Palmer, whose the third film that we're going to see, is an associate professor in the School of Geography at Melbourne. She teaches and researches on Indigenous environmental knowledge and practices, and her research is focused on Southeast Asia, particularly Timor-Leste and Indigenous Australia. And she's published very widely and is the author of an ethnography on people's complex relationships with water in Timor-Leste, and it's titled Water, Politics and Spiritual Ecology, Custom, Environmental Governance and Development, and that was published by Routledge in 2015. And her film that we're going to see, Wild Honey, is her first film, and it's accompanied by an essay that was published in the summer of 2019 edition of Minjin Literary Journal. So I'm now just going to invite Jane, Vicky and Lisa just to say a few words about their films, then I'll remind you about how you can watch them before we immerse ourselves in these wonderful films. So Jane, do you want to say a few words about your film?
Yeah, thanks very much, Uma. So Spirit is a story of belonging and longing in the Indian Himalayas. As Uma said, it's my second film in the village where I've worked for nearly 18 years. And over that time, very much has changed. So roads, electricity, and phones have transformed the village, but so too has the massive expansion of education and the lure of work and schooling in nearby towns and faraway cities. So villagers have been increasingly concerned about what these changes, and particularly growing out migration, mean for their sense of belonging to each other, to the land, and to the gods. And so my film explores this idea of belonging to this very sacred place in the midst of change. Of course, a sense of belonging can't be assumed, and the film shows that you have to work at it really quite hard. It's the slow alchemy of shared belief and everyday work, friendship, love, and loss. So these themes are seen through the eyes of a woman named Saraswati, while simultaneously following the entire village as it prepares for and celebrates this extraordinary 10-day festival called the Pandav Leela. The Spirit is very much a collaborative project that has emerged out of many years of conversations and planning in the village.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Looking forward to watching your film. Vicky, do you want to give a short introduction to your film?
Yep, I've just written a little summary, which I'll read out. Like many rural schools across China, Drum Village Primary School's days feel numbered. In the 4 decades since reform and opening up, China's economy has expanded enormously, going from a hermetically sealed Maoist state to the globally interconnected, export-oriented giant that we know today. This economic growth has undeniably raised the quality of life for all Chinese people. It has done so more for some than others, producing pronounced divides between urban and rural, coastal and inland populations. Perhaps nowhere are these inequalities more stark than in schooling, where students from rural areas persistently and structurally attain significantly lower educational outcomes than their urban counterparts. With a good education considered to be absolutely crucial to economic success in China, villages are responding by increasingly seeking out urban schooling for their children. As a result, the village schools that have historically raised China's youth are shrinking, hollowed out by the exodus towards townships and cities. Increasingly, the students left behind are from the poorest, least mobile groups of the population. Set in the context of this slow-moving crisis, Drum Village Primary School offers quiet vignettes of a cold winter's day at a shrinking village school in Shanxi province on the Lus Plateau in inland northern China. It's the first part of what I imagined to be a long-term documentary project exploring changing rural life in a globalized China. It's a meditative and observational piece. It gives no answers and no conclusions, but simply aims to offer a small window onto the intertwined lives of distant others. Thanks.
Thanks, Vicky. Looking forward to watching that film too. Lisa, Wild Honey.
Thanks, Uma, and thanks everybody for joining in this special screening event tonight. So Wild Honey is about human-environment relations on the international border dividing Timor-Leste from Indonesia. In the film, you'll see people care for migratory wild honeybees by making ritual offerings, by serenading them with love songs, and by offering their trees as seasonal houses. We also get a sense, at least that is from the love songs, that these bees care for people. Indeed, one elder tells us that bees are people. The film was made collaboratively with my friend and colleague Baltazar Kehi and his community, and it's really a meditation on the harvest where viewers are given intimate glimpses into the philosophies which continue to guide this important ritual practice. Now, our hope is that the film opens up conversations and reflections about the connections between people and bees and between people and each other in this particular place. While change is an important theme in the film, especially given the variability of the region's climate, the division of the land, and the changes in people's livelihood aspirations, just as important, we think, is the clear sense of cultural continuity and dynamism that it conveys. So we hope that you'll enjoy it tonight.
Thanks, Lisa. So 3 wonderful films, clearly very different, at least geographically, but also in their particular focus. But together, we feel that they really do highlight how people are addressing change and the ways in which they're confronting different aspects of modernity. So we're now about to begin the screenings. The Jane's film is 20 minutes long, Vicky's is 14, and Lisa's is 30. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that you all managed to see these magnificent films. I was absolutely captivated and transported by these beautiful, evocative films. Thank you so much to Jane, Vicky, and Lisa for sharing them. So insightful and redolent in depicting relationships, I thought, between people and places. And as you said, Lisa, in terms of continuities as well as change. And somebody in the question and answer said that it lifted her spirits. And I thought it certainly did lift the spirits while also being deeply moving. At this moment, I'm sitting in a sheep farmer's croft in the Scottish Highlands, in a place that I've been coming to for over 30 years. And watching the films really made me reflect, as they resonate so much with rural change here as well, sort of beyond change and continuity in Asia. So thanks for the comments that have been posted in the Q&A. People have found the films amazing, and just wanted to remind people to continue to post their questions. We've got a couple already to start off with. So thanks to Candice Boyd, who says, thanks for the insights that these films allow, and is asking you really to reflect on what you think the role of creative outcomes like this have for communicating research. You know, what do they offer that other forms of communication don't? And I was sort of also thinking about why you choose to represent your work about rural change through film. You know, does the visual offer something as a kind of sensual immediacy that's unrivaled by text? So maybe reflecting a little bit on why you chose that particular form of communication, which I have to say worked incredibly well, so thought-provoking and insightful. So I'm not sure who wants to start. Jane, do you want to start with responding to that question?
Yeah, sure, Uma. Yeah, I think just that sense of immediacy and, you know, immersion that you get, that you just can't get from writing. But, you know, when we think about rural change, or, you know, any kind of regional change, it's quite often thought about in terms of infrastructure, you know, buildings and roads and, you know, what it looks like. And it's really, really difficult to get a feel for how that is felt, how that's lived on the ground. And so Spirit for me was really about trying to get at that kind of emotional register, what it feels like to make those decisions to send your children away. You know, how does that longing feel like, that loss, and what does it feel like to be together? So all these kinds of emotional registers that you just can't get at on page.
Thank you. And Vicky, do you want to say something about why you chose to represent your, I mean, fascinating study of change in the primary school in China, why you chose to represent it through film?
Yeah, I think something to what Jane is saying about it being able to access kind of registers of experience that maybe written word doesn't. But I think if I reflect on it in my own practice, in terms of how this sits with the more kind of conventional styles of research and writing, is that I see this, I think, as a slightly different practice, I suppose. And just reading through the question when it came up, I was thinking about how when we write, and you know, the usual kind of textual outputs that we're asked to / conventionally do, I think I really feel a sense of my own agency in the situation to depict and to create a certain narrative or image. And that's something I think that I feel quite uncomfortable about all of the times, because the kind of translation work that I'm being asked to do. I remember years ago, Jane once said to me, going to the village, and I think this might even have been before one of my trips to film, that you know, the people you're talking to are the people who know everything. In a way, you're just there to collect these stories. You're there to ask. And there's, I think, I feel a certain discomfort in being tasked with the agency of every word that I write somehow leads back to me. And so I suppose with film, I see myself more as a technician, you know, as a person who's there to witness rather than someone who's there to really write and create and weave that place. And so I suppose the difference, to end this long point, I see is that there's this, when we write, you know, often we're linking back to theory and we're trying to reduce an image to some abstract point and to add to some body of knowledge. And I think with film, you know, for me, it's enough to just witness, and it's enough to see and to look and to feel, like Jane says. And that's something I think that the textual outputs that we're asked to do, they don't see that as enough, I suppose.
Lisa, do you see yourself as a technician witnessing what's happening?
Look, in terms of Candace's question, why did you choose to have a creative output in this way? I didn't really choose it. I just fell into it, I think, in a way. And now I can see lots of really good reasons why to do it, which I'd just like to run through. But yeah, I'm not sure that I exactly knew what I was getting myself in for, but I'm very glad I did. Obviously, all the things that Jane said and Vicky said, it's multi-sensory, it's very intimate, you can bear witness to things which you, in some ways you put yourself on the outer of, but in other ways you're very much inside them. And I think for me, one thing that really came home was the way in which the people were really active participants in that film that you just saw, Wild Honey, even performing in many ways for the camera. They were surprising themselves and I think each other really in terms of their candour, especially in relation to questions of change and the assertion of different points of view and values that we saw in the film. So for me, one of the great things about that film is it seems like it's an arena for debate and even politics. Secondly, for myself, I think it's great because I can concentrate on the sensory experience. And in this case, I should say a lot of that was getting stung by swarms of bees. So I was able to concentrate on that and not worry too much about the visual. The camera did that work for me. But then I had a record to go back to and to relive that sensory experience. And you didn't really see it in the film because I cut out some of that material, but the sacrifice of the pig had some amazing sensory details that I certainly learnt a lot from after the fact. And then finally, I think the films are a great visual way to recreate that sensory experience, both for me as the person that lived through it, but also hopefully for the audience. So it's multifaceted.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, just sort of leading on from what you've just said, Vicky, particularly about sort of witnessing, and Lisa and Jane as well, that Sergio Jarrillo de la Torre has asked, well, you know, did you screen the films back to the communities and what were their reactions? Because if you're saying that you were kind of witnessing, or Lisa, you sort of, it just came to you, you fell into it, you didn't choose it. So what was the reaction then of the communities? Did you show them the films and how did they reflect on them? Vicky, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, my answer will be quite different, I think, to Lisa and Jane's, because this is for me an unfinished project, I suppose. And this was the first a short film I made out of some of the footage, I suppose, that began quite informally. So this is actually only the second time it's screened, plus at a workshop that we did last year on Lisa was there, sorry. So I have shown some of the school teacher, for example, the English school teacher in the film has seen it, but I actually haven't shown it to anyone in this place because it's part of this, something that I'm not really sure what it is yet, I suppose. So, I mean, I'm happy to talk more on that, but I think that'll be quite different to Lisa and Jane's project so far.
Yeah, thank you. Lisa, do you want to come in there?
Look, I haven't managed to get right back into the community for a community screening. I was going once, our car broke down, we didn't get back across the border. It was supposed to be screened this year, back together with me in the community, which I was really looking forward to, but COVID's intervened. Individually, people have seen it through YouTube and other links. It's kind of interesting when I'm always kind of pushing, trying to get their responses, and they like it, but the conversation just moves so quickly to how much better the harvest was this year. and you know, really should have been there this year because it was bigger, better, and just kind of strikes me that, you know, people really live in the moment, and yeah, they're happy with the film, they're proud of it, but you know, they've got lives to live, get on with.
Thank you. Jane, did you manage to get back?
Yeah, I took the film back in November, December last year. And so, as I said, this is the second film that I'd made. The first film was a 15-minute film, and we made a longer version of that and showed it in the village. I probably made like a half-hour version or something. And anyway, with this one, they've given me really, really strict instructions that we cannot deal with a 15-minute film. You know, it needs to be 3 hours. So, and of course, you know, every night, you know, in the festival, for example, they, you know, the dancing of each night of that festival goes on for about 6 hours. So from about 9 till, you know, 3 in the morning or something. So they said, look, you've seen that we can sit through 6 hours of dancing, you know, give us something decent. So I cut a 45-minute version and took that back to the village. So obviously it included a lot more people, and we held it in the village, in the temple courtyard where the festival is held. And it would have been in exactly the same time that the festival would have happened again that year, but for various reasons it didn't happen. So it was kind of emotional for all sorts of reasons. To be sitting there watching us all sitting there, you know, a year beforehand, but in exactly the same place, all huddled up and freezing cold, and still that's, you know, that real sense of yeah, you know, incredible joy, and but also at the end of the Pandav, everyone cries like crazy because everyone goes away, and there's that sense of loss of you know, once the festival's finished. So it felt a bit like that too. So it was quite an emotional occasion. But it's available freely online, so people had seen it. Certainly people, you know, young people who had migrated to cities and have access to phones, and other people in the village had seen it, you know, on their phones on a small screen, obviously before then, and I've been in contact a lot, you know, before that happened. So yeah, they were pleased, really pleased.
Yeah, I mean, just to continue with what you're talking. Oh, sorry, go on, Vicky. Did you want to say something?
Oh, I was just going to add something, but please ask your...
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to
go ahead.
Pick up on something Lisa said around how people respond to the kinds of images that are being shown. Because this sense of looking at this, the kind of images that, you know, for me seemed remarkable, were, you know, some of the people I'd show some of the images, or the, you know, not the finished footage, would just be like, yeah, sure, this is our everyday life, and this isn't remarkable at all to me. I don't want to see this, or rather, I have no, you know, I don't really care. And I just want to reflect on just the kind of audiences maybe for who this kind of looking might be interesting or illuminating in some way. For me, I think with my project, I really thought of it as a exercise in representation to a distant audience, you know, an audience that has a Western audience, for example, like in particular, where something like the notion of what a village is in the 21st century still has quite, you know, no longer really corresponds with what the places are really like. But for the people experiencing those places, I think, you know, there's a certain everydayness, that kind of quotidian sense of, yeah, this is just kind of what it is. And I wonder if, you know, for the scenes being shot and the places, whether that sense of why the film's being made and who it's for differs between these three films quite, in some ways, quite significantly.
I mean, we've had a few questions about your sort of filmmaking practice and the responses that you had to that. And Birdie Shepherd asks, how did the people you were filming respond to having you there with a camera in hand? And saying that, in a way, Lisa, you just said that some of them were performing, but were there any difficulties or reservations that they had about being filmed? Lisa, do you want to respond to that?
Look, in my case, no. I mean, I nearly aborted the filmmaking practice because when I got there, I realized that the honey harvest was happening at night, and how on earth was I going to film that? But everybody just rallied around, and they said, no, we want this filmed, and, you know, we've got this plan together where we bought torches. I had like a team of men working on the torches. They were wearing shorts and t-shirts. They were getting stung by bees. They didn't care. I had the old man bossing all the young people around, telling them to be quiet so they could get a good film shot. So yeah, it was a really collaborative evening where, and the man that was narrating it, he surprised everybody with his narration because he was seen in the community as quite a materialist person. And the fact that he came out with this beautiful ancestral narrative, people spoke about it as though in some ways his ancestors, his father or grandfather actually had entered his body and spoken through him for the camera. So that's what I mean by performing. I don't mean a kind of contrived sense of performance. I mean the moment of the filming took people away to present themselves in certain ways. Yeah. So no, there were no concerns. It was fully in full enthusiasm in this case.
And Vicky, did you feel the same when you were making the film?
I think, yeah, that's an interesting question because I think the style of my film and the way I kind of approach the place and the research, I suppose, that it kind of came out of was quite different in that I was a student kind of learning about this place for the first time. So I suppose compared to Lisa and Jane, who both have these long-term engagements with this place, for me, filming was also, I suppose it mirrored the research process in a way where I was also seeing things for the first time, or I was, in this place meeting these people differently. So I think the filming came as part of my own process of discovery. What I think, how people responded, what did that mean? That meant that I was milling about a lot. There was a lot of just hours and hours and hours of sitting around that also involved at times filming, at times not filming. And I think people were mildly perplexed, but because the kind of networks that I'd gone through to kind of get into this place and the fact that they knew I was a researcher and, there was a student, built a certain kind of trust, I suppose, in what I was kind of there to do. Not that I suppose at this point necessarily know what that is yet, in that I didn't know what I was there to film, I suppose. I had this kind of question of representation, of changing rural life, of kind of looking at places, but didn't know how that would come up. So yeah, I think people kind of didn't mind in the sense that they were more just bemused by it all. But yeah, that's, I suppose, a bit different to the other films. Yeah.
I mean, Jane, how do you feel about that? I mean, in a sense, you were filming a kind of performance. I mean, an event that extended over nine days. Were there any difficulties or reservations that people had about being filmed, and how did they respond to you and your team wandering around with cameras recording this event?
In terms of the festival, they were super happy about it. People have access to phones now, and so you might even have seen in the audience there are lots of people filming it themselves, or on live videos, so people in Delhi were watching it simultaneously. So the idea of recording things is felt very normal for them, and they were really excited to have. And in fact, this was their idea that we should come and that I should film the panda. So that it was by their invitation. So all the festival stuff was great. The other kind of more intimate scenes, I always feel a bit torn about. Going around with a camera or having a camera between you and people I know very, very well, really close friends, feels very, very different. So it's very different from the kinds of practice that my research usually takes place. So going to the forest with people or hanging out with people, conducting participant observation, which is hanging out with people basically, where there's nothing in between, and I'm working with them. So coming with equipment really changes that relationship, or that feeling. And of course, people are super busy. They're always really busy, but particularly when they're trying to do their farm work alongside also staying up all night and preparing for the festival. So trying to kind of, taking people out for these kind of quiet moments always feels like such an imposition as well.
Yeah.
So also, so worries around time, but also, what that does to your relationship with people to have a camera in between. Unfortunately, people, you know, I know them well enough for that not to make a difference, but I wouldn't want to do it too often.
I'm just continuing with you, Jane. I mean, there's an interesting question here from Elizabeth Haynes about, I mean, you've worked in this village for many, many years, and you've lived there, and you've built you know, very deep relationships with people there. And the question is really about that, the space and time between filming and then editing, and the way in which you represent what was filmed and the people that you collaborated with. Did making the films alter your sense of the time and place that they were set in? You know, did it refocus your attention as you're back in Melbourne editing? In what ways did that sort of distance in time and space affect the way in which you made the film, or did it?
No, I don't think it did. I mean, in the editing process, I don't think that changed. I mean, partly because you know, this was many years in the making in terms of conversations, and I wanted to stay true to that. You know, to what we had planned in the village and with people. Of course, you're always making editorial decisions about you know, how to present the material. But I think, you know, one of the joys, and I think Lisa touched on this before, one of the joys of working with film is that you can kind of vicariously be there through that film for a really long time. So, you know, through the whole transcription process, you know, transcribing all the interviews and then kind of piecing that all together. And yeah, it's still a real treat for me. And I kind of, you know, when I'm missing it too much, I just go back and watch it. So, yeah.
What about you, Lisa? Did the sort of the process of actually editing the film, putting it together, did that sort of change the way in which you depicted the time and the place and the events?
Yeah. Look, that was my first ever honey harvest, and I had no idea what was going on. I just really pointed and shot, and I learnt about the event, well, both through going through it, but also working with the footage, working very closely with Balthazar, who translated this very high-level Tetum, which not many people could actually understand, but those love songs that were sung to the bees, that was all translated by Balthazar. I had no idea during the filming that, you know, what was being said. And as I said, there were a lot of moments that the camera captured that I hadn't noticed on the night or during the day. So I learned a lot about the event through the editing process. In some ways, it's quite similar to writing, only it's a much richer record. Yeah.
So thanks. I realise we've only got a couple of minutes left, and we've had a sort of a huge number of questions. There's some questions from Tracy Skelton around the relationship between children, parents, and teachers, and how they cope with the changes in their village, to Vicky, and one to Jane around whether young people are actually returning to participate in the festival. So, I mean, people are really engaging with your films, but I know we've only got a couple of minutes left. So I really want to just come back to a question that David Bissell asked early on. Sorry, Dave, leaving yours to the end, but I think it's really important in a sense that we try and sort of move beyond the specifics of the films and think about how they resonate more broadly, and also what they mean in this current moment. So David says, you know, it's such a brilliant treat to be able to watch these films, and thanks you all for that. And what he's asking is what he'd like to hear from all of you, what you found most surprising or unexpected about watching your film today at this particular moment in time. I mean, how did it make you reflect on the current situation of incredible change and profound change that we're going through at the moment? So can I start with you, Lisa?
Yeah, sure. When I read David's question, I nearly burst into tears. Just kind of really hit me to think about the difference between, I guess, when I shot that film and now in lockdown 2.0 in Melbourne. But then I just quickly wrote down a few thoughts, and I'll read them out. I wrote down strength, care, beauty, togetherness, a collective excitement about the multi-species world in all its possibilities. So when I was watching my film, that's what resonated for me today, which really speaks to the opposite of what I'm feeling right now, but
yeah,
we can get it back.
oh, thank you, Lisa. Vicky.
I have a couple of points. My my instinctive response to David's question was, what I found most surprising was, compared to Jane's, coming right after Jane's, which was super colorful and beautifully shot and very high definition, I felt the paucity of my own filming. That was my first reaction, was to wish
Yours
I'd
was all
done
those
different.
things as well.
Thank you.
Yours was all of that too.
But I suppose, giving a more serious answer to that question, maybe two things strike me. Thinking about this kind of contemporary moment is the question of, one, will I ever be able to go back to China? I know that's probably catastrophizing a bit, or to go back to this place, but I think in the current historical moment, both you know, public health wise, but also geopolitically, it's not clear to me when and if that's a possibility. And the second one that it made me think about, I suppose, is that so my film is kind of willfully slow, I suppose I would call it. And in a way, I think, you know, this session is talking about rural change and the pace of change. And on the one hand, I think we can look at this and go, this change is happening, you know, in China in particular, and, you know, in all of these places, so fast, but yet the embodied way, I suppose, in which those changes unfold happen in real time. And in terms of the kind of pace of everyday life, I think for me, there was something about the pace of this film that really resonated with, for example, you know, our current moment, which is a moment of enormous change, and yet it's not necessarily felt that way. You know, in a way, it can be too fast and too slow, all at once.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, there were some comments in the Q&A where, you know, people had commented on the wonderful slowness about that film, and they thought that was just beautiful. The children playing outside, that was so lovely, and it really captured that embodied experience. And I think, as you say, it was about as kind of a slowness, and yet when you put the figures up about the change in the numbers of pupils and teachers, you know, that just seemed so quick at the same time. Jane, do you want to say something about the contemporary moment and how it resonates in a way with your film, or makes you reflect on that?
I mean, I imagine lots of people think this when they just watch anything on TV these days. Just that need for physical, bodily touch, you know, just seeing those scenes of, you know, and remembering feeling, you know, crammed in together, that sense of being together with a shared purpose, and not watching but experiencing that, you know, because as an audience you're part of that, you know, in that festival. It's not a kind of merely an audience thing, but just, yeah, being with people and, you know, viscerally feeling that need for that contact, and like the others, wondering, when am I going to get back there, and feeling a deep sense of longing.
Well, I think watching your three films did make me feel very kind of viscerally connected to the people and the places that you so beautifully depicted, and the relationships between you and those people and places. So just thanks to all three of you, Jane, Vicky and Lisa, for sharing your films. Thanks to all the people who participated and joined in. I'm sorry that we couldn't go through all the questions and answers, but just testament to how important those films are and how much people were engaging with them. Vicky, you said, you know, you saw yourself as a bit of a technician. I have to say, I'm not a technician at all. And I really want to thank Julia Cleghorn and Daryl Holland from the Faculty of Science, who without them, I would not have been able to do this from the Scottish Highlands at all. Julia had had a very long day and still connected up with me to make sure that the community broadband here was working. So thanks to Julia and to Daryl, and thanks to all of you for participating. Thank you.